like to welcome you, especially some of you said it was your first time here, so a special welcome to you. Our concerts are about once a month for between September and June, basically. We have one more concert for this concert series season, and then we'll start again probably in September or October next year. But I'm happy to introduce to you Duo Beaux Arts. If you would please come. So they come to us from Florida, and they travel through the whole country. So we're very lucky to have them. So the mic is on.
Okay.
Here it is.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much for being here. We are extremely happy to be here to present you this program of piano solo and duet music, which is music for piano for hands. And I hope you will enjoy our selections. We're going to start the program. I'll just give a little brief description of the works we'll be performing. The first piece is by Emmanuel Chablier, who is not exactly a household name. And Chablier, fair or not, sort of belong to a group of composers very often we refer to as one-work wonders, meaning that throughout their career they wrote sort of one very significant piece, at least to the general audience, that people remember them by. So in this particular case, the first piece we're about to play for you is such a work, the wonderful España, that he composed towards the end of his life. It's basically a work as a tribute to the country of Spain. He wrote that as a commission piece, commissioned by a man named Charles Lamonroe, who was a very well-known conductor and concert organizer. He organized the famous Lamonroe concerts, and he also organized his own orchestra called the Lamonroe Symphony. And all the way up to about 1980s, it was still considered the finest symphony orchestra in all of France. So this piece started out as originally an orchestral piece, but due to its immense popularity, later on was transcribed for piano forehand, so it can be performed in more intimate settings like this. And I'm sure once you hear the music, even if you didn't know the name of the piece or the name of the composer, you will somehow recognize it. It's just so popular that it's always sort of being played somewhere. It's like always in the air. So do enjoy. Well, I hope most of you recognize the tune of this piece. Like I said, one word wonder, right? So next, I'll play for you a couple of solo works, also by French composers. The first one, I think, almost needs no introduction at all. It's the famous Clair de Lune, The Moonlight, by Claude Debussy, probably his best-known composition, and easily placed among the top 10 most beloved piano solo pieces. The only thing I want to mention that people might not know is that Clair de Lune was not the original title Debussy intended for this piece. He actually called it Promenade Sentimentale, a sentimental walk. Only much later on, after reading the Baudelaire poem called Clair de Lune, he liked the title so much that he replaced it for this piece, and clearly very wise decision. It caught on very, very nicely. So here's Clair de Lune. to the music of Emmanuel Chevalier. And for many music scholars, they actually consider this next piece, the Bourrée Fantasque, to be the second most well-known piece by Chevalier. But the second best known is a big distance from the first one because literally nobody knows about this piece. He actually composed quite a large number of music for solo piano, almost 2 hours worth, and just about all of it is pretty much either forgotten or ignored today by pianists, so I'm sort of happy to bring at least one of these pieces back to the repertoire. Bourrée Fantasque translate into a funny, awkward, or whimsical bourrée. Bourrée is a Baroque-era French dance, a very energetic dance, so it's a very lively piece. But it's sort of interesting to see how Chevalier himself thought of this work. By the way, this is actually his final composition for the piano. He dedicated to an 18-year-old concert pianist, and in his correspondence with that pianist, he said, you know, I concocted this little piece for you. It needs to be played either in a completely crazy manner or entirely stupid. So, crazy and stupid is his own description of this piece, so you can decide. probably the silliest piece I've ever played. So we got that out of the way. Now we'll move on to something far more serious. This next work by Franz Schubert is arguably the best known and the greatest composition ever written for piano duet. His famous Fantasy in F minor, composed in the very last year of his sadly very shortly lived life. He was probably the shortest living composer amongst the great composers, only at age 31. He passed away in 1828. And the final year of his life has long been regarded as a year of musical miracles due to the quantity and quality of the output that he was able to generate within that 1 year. It was as if that he knew the end was near, so he was really producing some of his greatest masterworks, including this great fantasy. The fantasy is a type of composition that's in one movement, but contains many different sections, each representing a different characteristics. And in this piece, all these different sections were all connected by this beautiful, haunting scene at the beginning you will hear, and some of you might recognize immediately because the piece is so well known, has been used in many different settings, movies, commercials. Was featured very prominently in the 1980s film called Madame Zuzowska, featuring Shirley MacLaine, who portrays a Polish piano teacher living in London and discovered a very talented Indian pupil. And together they performed this piece sort of throughout the movie. So please enjoy F minor Fantasy by Schubert. Well, it's actually not easy to follow up with anything after this piece. But Catherine will play for you a solo piece by Johannes Brahms, which is sort of in the same characteristic as the fantasy. It's intermezzo, a very late work, very alternate work, extremely personal, introverted, and in music like that, we sometimes say that even the presence of the performer can be one too many. to perform our last selection for you this afternoon after coming from Schubert and Brahms is kind of like going from the sublime to the absurd. This transcription of the famous Blue Daniel Waltz by Johann Strauss Jr. Is by far the craziest piece we have ever seen in the duet repertoire, mostly because sort of the unique nature of this transcription, because usually when you write a piece, even if it's dedicated to a specific musician, it's still meant to be sort of played by everybody else. But this one is kind of musically, technically, and physically custom-made for one particular duet team. Greg Anderson, the transcriber, has a very successful duet combination of his own, and he said that he took into consideration their own physical body, height, weight, and their own size into consideration while making this arrangement. So in a way, it's not really meant for anybody else to do it. So if you watch them play it, and I'm sure you can find clips on YouTube, it probably seemed like just a very exciting, wonderful piece, and they sort of toss it off. But when we have to play it, in a way, I think it's a little bit more entertaining, actually, just because the type of body motion, the twists and turns we have to put ourselves through just to get to everything that he put into the score, since it's not meant for us to do it. So it's a real roller coaster ride for us every time we play it. I guess we enjoy this type of rides very much. But one problem is that we never really know whether we can come out the other side to stick the landing, so to speak. So every time it's unknown. In that sense, it's kind of exciting, kind of scary. So hopefully we have a good afternoon today, and hope you will enjoy the ride along with us.
we were on your way from different states, and we were able to fit the concerts right.
It's a pleasure being
As
here.
our schedule works also, so thank you. It was really
Thank you
wonderful.
so much
Thank
for
you all for
having
being
us.
here.
I always admire people who are husband and wives and also work together and have to. So thank you.
We learned early on how to get out of each other's way.
So we'll open a reception in a second. The next concert is the last one for our season, and we call it "We Will Rock You," and it's mostly the choirs from Resurrection, but we'll do a medley by Queen, and we'll do Cole Porter medley and parts of West Side Story and other things like that. So if you want to come and reminisce with us, it's a fun concert. We'll have a small band also. So hope to see you. That's on June 8th. And then if you're not on our concert series list, I'll just send one email before the concert comes. So let me know, or you can go on our website and just subscribe. And we promise not to clog your inboxes. Thank you.
Thank you.
We'll see you